Yeah.
Hey everybody, it's JJ French, guitar player of Twisted Sister, manager, guitarist, and I have a new book out. It's called Twisted Business. I co-wrote with Steve Farber, and best advice I ever got was probably from the chairman of Atlantic Records, Ahmet Erdogan, who said to me once that success is easier if you don't mind who gets the credit.
Success is easier if you don't mind who gets the credit. Wow, dude, that's a pretty good start here for the book. Congratulations, first of all, on the book, Steve and JJ. This is great, guys. I'm super happy for you. So for those who are watching, they're like, who the hell are these guys? So JJ from the amazing Twisted Sister and Farber here from Love is Just Damn Good Business. Do what you love in the service of those who love what you do. And I love you guys, man. I'm so glad that you're here. So take me back to the beginning here of the relationship that you guys started so we can jump from there.
Well, Phil, first of all, thank you for having us. I love your new logo on your shirt. That's fantastic.
Thank you, sir.
So where it all started, you were actually there. You were there where it all started. Once upon a time at a conference in Chicago called SobCon. A business conference for people involved in social media and online stuff and all that. And we were there participating. I was there to participate and speak. JJ was there with Sharon, his girlfriend at the time, now his wife, who worked at Forbes.com, and he came along to support her and check the scene out. And that's where we first met. And you were there too.
Yeah, I was there too. So, JJ, I got to embarrass you a little, buddy. Do you remember these pictures?
Of course I do. That was karaoke night.
That was karaoke night with me and you singing I Wanna Rock by your band, Twisted Sister, back to back, after you told me if they play any Twisted Sister, you're leaving. So I'm grateful that you lied and you decided to stick with me, brother. So, yeah. But that was fun, man. And I totally remember that like it was yesterday because, of course, I think fondly of Sharon, who one of the sweetest people in the world, that happens to like the three of us. JJ, probably you a little more than me and Steve. But as it starts there, right, that's really the start of the book. But JJ, take us back, man, to the start of Twisted Sister and how you got clean, man. This is crazy. Because I remember you telling us this story, when we met, man. Tell us how you got clean and how that really propelled everything that happened.
So the book is a bizwar. It's a business book and a memoir. I coined the phrase bizarre myself. It's like a rom-com, romantic comedy. And I gave the idea to my publisher, and I said, it's the world's first bizwar. So the first part of the book is a memoir, which sets up the business part of the book. And it's important that it sets it up. It's really, really important because everything that happened between the ages of 15 and 20 infused how I was going to approach the rest of the world. Just so happened that my 15 and 20 was 1967 and 1972, and that was really the apex of the hippie culture in the United States and around the world. And if you were an active participant in that world, then it was all like drugs, it was rock and roll, it was politics, it was everything. It was a really crazy time in the United States. We had assassinations of political leaders, and we had uprisings everywhere. And if you were an anti-war activist or political activist, plus adding to that rock and roll at its absolute peak at the Fillmore East, you could see every rock star you could possibly want to see. And then, of course, the drug scene, which coalesced around it. It was an amazing time. And I took full advantage of everything because, I was a rock and roll musician. I wanted money to buy guitars. So I started dealing weed. So frankly, at the age of 15, I was telling you all that weed was the coming thing. And you see, I was 100% right because everybody's now selling weed. But, unfortunately, the weed thing kind of morphed into everything else. Even though the horror stories of it all leads to heroin sounded scary, it actually wound up doing that. And over the course of the 5 years from 1967 to 72, the entire drug scene that I was involved in got crazier. The dealing got crazier. The drugs got crazier. The situation got more dangerous. People started dying of even murders or overdoses. My best friend and girlfriend became heroin addicts, and I OD'd on heroin amongst many other things and was almost murdered several times in drug deals. So I kind of skirted the line. And, the whole point was just to make money to buy guitars and amps. I wasn't trying to become the world's, I wasn't trying to become, the world's biggest dealer. I just wanted money to go to concerts and buy guitars. So what happened was I was confronted with a choice. by the spring of 72, save myself or kind of just get sucked in and die. And so literally I made a very practical decision after I had gotten robbed at knife point by a couple of old high school friends who came to my house and stole what drugs I had that day. And that decision was either I stop taking everything and let's stop, or probably wind up dead from in either an overdose or being at the wrong place at the wrong time, or wound up in jail with a police record. And so on Easter Sunday, 1972, I took whatever drugs I had left, and that was the end of it. I woke up the next day, and that was it. So I actually was able to stop. Cold turkey, never looked back, never thought about it again. I said, man, you had 5 crazy years, insane years, and it's time to stop. So that's really how it ended.
Yeah. Wow. So held up at knife point by your friends. Are you still friends with those guys?
Never saw them again, but my mother was very well aware they had just robbed me. And if it wasn't for the fact they were scared of my mother, they could have killed me, because my mother walked in the room while they were doing it, and they put the knife away, and they said, "Hi, Mrs. Segal, how are you?" And like, and then they said, maybe we should leave now. So they took all the money and the drugs, and they walked out the front door. And I said to them, as I got in the elevator, I said, "You're now off my Christmas list." And my mother looked at me and said, "You just got robbed, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I did." She goes, "You know, it's over, don't you?" And I went, yeah, I know. It's like that 5-year journey is done. And so I was lucky. I was one of the lucky ones. And it's a true story, and it's not hyperbole. I was a full-blown drug. I mean, it was like crazy that I was able to just kind of snap out of it. However, that's the good news was I stopped doing drugs, and completely. And maybe the bad news to my mom is I said, well, maybe I'll just become a transvestite, which is what happened to Twisted Sister. So I don't know which one was more challenging. Yeah. Isn't that where we all wind up anyway?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That Steve and I here clearly in the transvestite camp as well. Appreciate that, John. Thanks for pointing that out today. I didn't know they're Polish, but hey, whatever, man.
Well, transvestitism is just damn good business. That's all I got to say. That's your next book.
That's the sequel.
Steve and I are writing. Steve and I are writing that book right now. John, I appreciate you promoting our book as you're on the show promoting yours. So thank you for that, sir. So off your Christmas, dude, you're Jewish. How the hell do you Christmas list, John?
That's what my parents were so my parents were so reformed they were Catholic. I mean, my parents were they were atheist Jews, and so just because you're Jewish doesn't mean you're religious. And my parents were not religious. I mean, I'm so non-religious. I have to ask my Puerto Rican doorman in my building where the holidays are because I don't know them. They have to tell me. By the way, you do know it's Yom Kippur tomorrow. So thanks for letting me know. So no, my parents celebrated Christmas and Hanukkah. It was one of those kinds of like New York super reform, secular Jews. And by the way, just to say that Jews write the best Christmas songs, just so you know, Irving Berlin, they write the best Christmas songs. Originally when Mel Torme wrote the Christmas song, Chestnuts Roasting on Open Fire, it was originally going to be Latkes Floating in a Sea of Oil, but nobody thought that had the same.
Not the same market.
Yeah.
No. Is Twisted Sister going to record that song? That's the question.
Well, we did.
Yeah.
On the Twisted Christmas album, we did record that song. As a matter of fact, because we found out that We're Not Going to Take It and Come All You Faithful are the same song, which is why we were able to transfer it over. And when we played on the Tonight Show, Jay Leno held up our CD and said, Twisted Sister, just what you think of when you think of Christmas. And then we played Oh Come All You Faithful, which was in essence, We're Not Going to Take It.
That if you haven't heard that, Phil, Twisted Christmas is a phenomenal Christmas album.
Yeah,
it's just
great. Yeah, for sure, right? Yeah. So is the whole? I got to ask, and then we'll get back in the book. So is the whole band Jewish, John, or is it just you?
No, it's me and Mark Mendoza, whose real name is Mark Finkelstein Glickman. So I guess that's Jewish.
Maybe a little bit. Finkelstein Glickman.
And his mom was Ethel Finkelstein Glickman, and I was married to his sister Jody Finkelstein Glickman. So of course for a short period of time. So we're obviously Jews. And Dee Snider is not, although people think he is. He is not. And then we had 2 Roman Catholics in the band. So it was a kind of nice mix. AJ and Eddie were Roman Catholics, and we had 2 Jews. And so, but as Steve loves my line, when I say that, we play thousands of shows and we do the same show every night with a heavy metal version of Cats, except we're Jewish, so we spell it Katz. So,
yeah, like a deli. Yeah.
So.
Wow. Wow. So, Farber, how did you rein this guy in to actually get this book written? Because it is well written. I mean, Twisted Business, the fact that you're able to take the word twisted and turn it into something that we actually can learn is pretty freaking phenomenal. So, talk to us about that process and how it worked reining in this crazy cat with a K.
Yeah, thanks. There's a couple of different levels to that answer. First of all, the process that we used was I sat down with JJ in his apartment in New York. And I turned the recorder on and I said, start talking, which, as you know, is all the prompting that you need with JJ French. And we started at the beginning and he just told me the whole story. Now, I'd heard a lot of those stories before, but to hear them in sequence, in chronological order from the very beginning when he was a little kid, which is actually one of my favorite parts of the book, all the way to the resurrection of the band and their subsequent retirement, 40 years later, was an amazing thing. But I had piles of transcripts, right? So then the process was getting it from just pure, verbal outpouring of story after story to get that into a form that would work on the page. So part of that decision was what stories are not going to be in the book, what stories serve the points. How do we structure this thing? And that was my job, was to literally kind of rewrite line by line. The twisted method, the twisted acrostic was John's or JJ's. We call him John. That's what his friends call him, So sometimes I slipped. I never really know what the hell to call him. That guy, the bald guy, was walking through Central Park one day, and just kind of it just all came together. So this whole idea of using the name of the band, stands for tenacity, wisdom, inspiration, stability, trust, excellence, and discipline. It's a convenient structure because it's the name of the band, but the principles, all of those principles are really critical business principles. So part of our discussion was, okay, if that's the twisted process, we had a conversation. Actually, we were holed up in Florida. We met up there because I had a speaking gig there, and JJ came down and we sat in a hotel room for a couple of days. And part of our discussion was, I would say to him, well, what do you mean? What do you mean by excellence? What do you mean by tenacity? What do you mean by wisdom? All these things. So we hashed that out. The idea being that we wanted people to have a book that not only would entertain them with these really great and oftentimes hilarious stories, but to be able to walk away with ideas that they can use in their business, in their life, whether they're in the music business or they're in the business of dentistry. I mean, it doesn't matter. So that's how it came together. Lots of dialogue, and then from my standpoint, lots of time sitting in front of the computer with my keyboard and writing and rewriting and rewriting. And it I got to say, it turned out great. I mean, this is the first process, the first time I've done this sort of a thing, as you know. It's my 5th book, but the first 4 I wrote. I had some help with the 4th book, somebody that I was kicking it back and forth with. But this was in service of JJ's story and his voice. So it was really quite a challenging and fun process for me.
Yeah, well, it turned out great. I mean, JJ, I hear your voice through the words and all of it, right? I can hear you saying the book, right? Sitting next to me and having a conversation with me about that. And I think that is amazing. And what's most amazing, I mean, if I think back to, 13, 12 years ago, when I met you, honestly, I had no idea that you knew so much about business. But one of the surprising things to me was not only did you play in the band, dude, but this was your thing. You were the business brain behind that. So what would you say led to your big break of 35 years in Twisted Sister? What was the big thing that changed it from, hey, we're a band that gigs out, to holy shit, we're playing in front of sold out audiences and we're a thing?
the band's climb was very slow and very long, and it was so perfectly done that there was no point where I said, "Oh, we're now bigger than the next." I mean, before we even had a record deal, we were playing to the club scene in the New York area was insane, and people have no idea. We were playing to regularly to crowds of 3,000 to 5,000 people every night, 5 nights a week. So that was nothing. We'd already played an outdoor show to 22,000 people and shut down Route 110 in Long Island in 1979. So that was really nothing. So none of that was particularly interesting. But as Steve knows, and I always talk about this, life is a series of these unexpected events that can change your life on any given day, and you kind of don't realize it happens. And when you succeed the way we succeeded, it's because preparation meets opportunity. So when that fateful day occurs, if you're prepared to take advantage of that fateful day, then something good will happen for you. So it's all in the preparation, and the band had so many years of preparation. I mean, my line is that we were turned down more times than a bedsheet and have come back more times than Freddy Krueger and Michael Myers, and it's so true. What happens is you are hardened and forged in the fires of rejection and excellence, which we get into in the book. The Twisted Method became a Twisted Method because of watching Steve essentially at that SobCon. I'd never seen a speaker. And then we saw Tommy Spalding, and then I saw other speakers, and I realized that every speaker who has a book, because I needed a book, which I learned shortly after you need a book. Steve's got me, he got me into speaking, and I'm watching all these guys, and everyone has a theory in a book. Everyone's got a theory. What's the theory? You can tell stories, but there's no theory, and you want to make a sellable theory. So the book answers many things. Steve brings the entertainment value. Steve brings the humor. Steve brings the personal factor in, which is the beauty of his writing. And as much as I am a professional writer, I wanted an outside person who could go, John, enough. Okay, this is good. This is all right, but this is good. And we're going to do this and make it all happen. The point of the business section of it was purely an outpouring of my desire to structure it within a business context so I could do motivational and business conferences and actually sit there with a focus and go, look, guys, it's cute that I'm in a rock band. It's great rock and roll. It's stories. It's sexy. But let me just tell you something. Behind that all is a framework, an actual framework of the reasons why we succeeded from a business standpoint. Now, let me add, my singer, Dee Snider, is one of the greatest singers in the world, and he wrote great songs. And if he didn't write those great songs, you and I wouldn't be talking. Okay? So I talk about that in the book. It's collaboration, and Steve and I work together. And the collaboration is an extension of my collaborative mentality, which is you don't do it alone. You just don't. I'm not a singer. I'm not a songwriter. I needed Dee. I'm not a producer. I needed Mark. I'm not a bass player. I'm not a guitar. You needed all these people around you. But the sublimation of ego to allow yourself is a whole other art form. And until Ahmet Ertegun, the chairman of Atlantic Records, said those words to me, I always knew that I had that capacity to put my ego aside to allow a larger thing to happen. Until he said it, I didn't hear another human being say it. So when we had dinner one night, and I said to him, how did you, as a chairman of Atlantic Records, go from Coltrane in the 50s to the Coasters and the Drifters, and then Led Zeppelin and Crosby, Stills and Nash and AC/DC and Rat and Twisted Sister and hip hop and all that? How did you do that? And he goes, well, I had other people. He goes, if I had a label based on what I liked, I'd be broke. He goes, I needed to trust people. I needed to bring people in and trust them. And then he said, and by the way, success is easier if you don't mind. He gets the credit. And when it comes to lead singers, they're the most self-absorbed, narcissistic people on the planet. They're a species of human. That's actually, and everybody kind of has one. And we all deal with them. Ask Aerosmith, ask the Rolling Stones. I mean, we deal with these guys called lead singers. You know what they say? What's the difference between a lead singer and a terrorist? The answer is you can negotiate with a terrorist. They're an interesting species. And Dee was my conduit to it, without which we wouldn't even be talking. So there's kind of like, in a nutshell, the theory behind why the book became the book and how the Twisted Method coalesced in a narrative that's easily understood, easily digested, and easily put in place if you follow the rules, which is why I think it is the business book of the year. And I think that to have a heavy metal guitar player actually compose, along with his co-writer, the business book of the year is probably a shock to people. But I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that, because the rules of this book apply to every single business in the world. It has nothing to do with being in a band, although of course it works with a band. It works with everything. It works with everything. That's the beauty of it. It's like, you want to know how to deal with crap in this world and how to put together a business that makes sense. Read this book, because we turn roadblocks into pathways. And that's really the great part of this book.
Awesome. No,
the thing,
yeah, go ahead, Steve.
there were a couple of things that hooked me in from the first time JJ and I sat down and had a conversation at that aforementioned conference. The first hook for me was he explained to me that he had determined early on in his music career that there was no place for drugs and alcohol in the business of rock and roll, which to me was, Twisted Sister, and that it was like, what? And he explained that, that band with Dee Snider that had all those hit records was the 11th version of the band. And there were a lot of casualties in the previous versions because of drugs and alcohol primarily. And he was young when he came to that conclusion. What were you, like 20, 21, something like that? 19?
Yeah, well, because you're right, Steve. I was 20 when I joined the band as the last original member, and that band was all drinkers and alcoholics. I didn't know if that was going to have a negative effect, but within 2 years, that was destroyed because the original singer in a drunken rage pulled a loaded gun out on the drummer, threatening to kill him. This is why I walked into that scene and saw that and thought my life was over as I knew it. I thought I was going to be a witness in a murder trial. And then I went, oh my God, alcohol is just as bad as everything else. And of course, we fired those guys. We hired 2 other guys, and they were methadone addicts. And that wasn't obviously the answer either, because those guys stole the truck from me and held it for ransom. And so after that, I came to this conclusion that Steve loved, which is like, there's no room for this crap.
Yeah, but there are a couple of things. There's a subtler aspect to that also impressed me. One is, he didn't just come to that conclusion for himself, that he didn't want to do that anymore for himself. Ultimately, it became an operating principle for the band that he put together. So it was also a business decision or a cultural decision for this team or band, or, you could call it any number of things, but that's essentially what it is. It's a team. And so that was one thing. But then as we talked more and more, it became really clear that these weren't just great stories, but that his talent was in business. And of course, being a business guy, that really intrigued me. And so a lot of our discussions right from the beginning were around, so what's the principle behind that? What do the rest of us need to learn based on your experience? And it is an unusual combination. I also remember, JJ, that in that somewhere in that first time that we met during that conference, I remember you described yourself as a pretty good guitar player. Like I think you said, I'm a B-level guitar player, I think is what you said, on the B team.
Yeah, I said I'm a 250 hitter, a professional 250 hitter in baseball. You have a nice long career. You don't make the Hall of Fame, but you're professional and you show up on time and you do your job, and you get 1 out of every 4 hits. And that's great. You have a great life.
But the distinction that you made, and the reason I bring it up is you're making a distinction between being a guitar player and being in the business of rock and roll. There's a difference between being a world-class guitar player and being a rock star. They're different. They require different skills. And I had never thought of that before. I just figured that any guitar player in a band is going to say, I'm, the world's greatest guitar player, whether it's true or not. But your perspective on the business side of it is why Twisted Sister happened. It's why it succeeded. Yeah, yes, with great songs and an incredible lead singer and all of that, but that the business side of it is just as critical.
Yeah, the qualifications of being a rock star do not involve being a great musician. In fact, most of the rock stars I know don't know how to read music. Most of the guys I know how to read music are not rock stars, because you follow different paths. And, we all started the same. We all saw the Beatles on TV or whatever. And then we kind of went our separate ways. And, there's guys who became professional studio musicians and not necessarily rock stars. There's guys who became rock stars. And there's plenty of guys who just became dentists, lawyers, doctors, who happen to play on weekends with their friends because they came to the conclusion they couldn't even get to that point. And that's a whole other self-analysis. That's a whole other self-analysis. When I go to weddings and I see a wedding band, I see the average guys in the band are 40, 50, and you realize these guys had a dream, and that wasn't it to go where I went. We risked everything to get what we want. We are in this tiny little, it's like a pyramid. You crawl up, you crawl up, you crawl up, you crawl up, you crawl up. And then you realize when you look back down, it's like climbing the pyramid and looking down at the mountain. You go, man, how the hell, how did that get there? In fact, the setup of the book was perfect because there's a conversation with my brother that set the whole thing off, which was true. My brother was a school teacher, and he was, had a very nice, stable life, 30 years professional school teacher, and then another teacher at a private school. And he really said to me one day, how do you run your life? And I said, what do you mean? Like, how do I play guitar? No, how do you run your life? I said, what do you mean? What do you mean? He goes, well, I don't get this. You're a teenager and you're a druggie and you're a drug addict, and then you stop it, and then you join this transvestite rock band, and you kill yourself for 10 years, and then all of a sudden, for some reason, you guys explode. You become one of the biggest bands in the world, and just at the peak of all of it, you get sued for millions of dollars, and you have to go bankrupt, and you lose everything, and you go through a divorce, and then you remarry, and you have a kid, and then you manage this band called Seven Dust, and you crawl back up, and you make it really, really big. And just at that point, the band fires you, your second wife leaves you, your kid has an eye disease, you have a heart condition, you have to have 2 operations, the whole thing comes crashing down again. Then, for some reason, the band comes back. And over the last 15 years, you became one of the biggest festival bands in the world. And I looked at my brother and I went, oh, man, that's a crazy story. I went, who is that guy? And my brother said, how do you do that? I'm a teacher. I just wanted my life to go like this. And I looked at my brother and I said, well, Jeff, I'm an entrepreneur. And I said, entrepreneurs are born with asbestos underwear. And we can take the heat. And we take big risks, and we lose big, and we win big. And my life has been a whole series of winning big, losing big, keeping it in perspective, and surviving.
Yeah, well, and that's the whole lesson in the book. I mean, to your point, you just summarized the whole thing, right? Of all the stuff that you've been through. But let's dig a little deeper here on a couple of the letters of Twisted, so we can provide a little bit of action for folks. So W is wisdom. And I think that's one that a lot of folks think, hey, I'd love some wisdom. Where can I get it tomorrow? Right? So talk to me, JJ, about wisdom and how you came upon that as one of the most important things in your world.
I think if you asked any of my teachers in school if they thought I had wisdom, they would have told you no. I was just a horrible student and like a guy who talked too much and just was screwed up at school. But what I'm fond of saying is that crises that confront your life personally or professionally and how you deal with them exposes, it doesn't create character, it exposes it. And I think that there were issues in my life that came up, and looking back, how I approached them was basically wisdom. So I had a lot of wisdom. Inherently, I did not understand that wisdom at the time. I kept diaries for many, many years so I could reflect on that wisdom, because there were things I did and said. First of all, I talked my way out of 2 drug busts. So I guess I'm a smart guy, and that was before I joined the band. You have to be really smart, to be in that world and to talk your way out of a lot of stuff, which I talked my way out of. But putting that aside, when my mom died, my girlfriend left me, and the band broke up when I was 22 years old. I went into a crushing depression, and it was one of the worst times of my life. And I looked at my father at my mother's funeral, after my mother's funeral, and I looked at him and I said, listen, you and I have no relationship. We have none. We don't, we really don't see eye to eye. My mom raised me. And this is me at the age of 22 talking to a man who's, 60, 64 at the time. And I said, we need to come to terms with the relationship, otherwise we have none. And he said, well, what are you suggesting? I said, so if I forget all the times you used to take a belt out and whip me, and you forget all the times I disappointed you by dealing drugs and selling drugs and taking drugs and playing rock and roll and dropping out of high school, if we could just shake on that, and because I know you're not going to a therapist, so that's over. If we could shake on that and move on, maybe we can have a good life, and let's just not talk about the past anymore. And we shook on it, and we had a great 10 years. It wasn't the deepest 10 years, but it was a great 10 years. We talked about baseball. My father would be on the road. He'd ask me how the band is. I saved that relationship. That was never going to be saved. So I think that was an enormous insight on how to deal with people. And then that continued to add up as time went on, and we changed members and made decisions in business You know, we've had our trucks blown up by club owners, by rival club owners. That was really crazy. You know, how you come back from that? I mean, stuff just happens, and the book really goes into depth. Probably the smartest thing I ever did was talking a judge into letting me keep the name Twisted Sister in a bankruptcy hearing. That was maybe like my shining moment of wisdom. So the point being, Phil, is that every great business needs somebody who's a visionary. And wisdom is that vision, and I have that vision. Keith Richards was once asked, what's the difference between him and Mick Jagger? This maybe puts this in perspective. He goes, well, Mick Jagger wakes up every morning and says, what am I doing today, 10 days from now, 10 weeks from now, 10 months from now, 10 years from now? Keith says, but I get up and go, I got up this morning. So my thing is, I've always had a vision. I've always said what's going on 10 weeks, 10 months. So when trauma hits, the hardest thing for trauma is to understand how you're going to get over it and survive it, because you look back at trauma. If you get over it, you go, man, that sucked that period of time, but you can make a joke out of it. Didn't. At the time, you were crazy. At the time, it was killing you. At the time, it was the most painful thing in the world. Do you have the ability to go past it? When you run a business, you have to be able to look at the guys, and you have to just say, look, there's a way we'll get through this stuff. And that's maybe the best way I can.
Yeah. So to summarize it, I'll just read you. I'll read you a couple of lines. Here it is. A couple of lines from the book that I think summarize and encapsulate what he just said. Wisdom, I've learned, is seeing the big picture and making daily decisions and working out solutions on that basis. Whether you're in a brainstorming session, drawing up a business proposal, or making a deal, you have to make yourself see that what you're doing is about more than what's going on in the moment. It's knowing that everything you do is just a small part of a much larger thing. And I think that's a brilliant description of wisdom. How do you gain it? By challenging yourself in the moment to ask what are the implications of this in the context of the bigger picture, that vision of what we're trying to create. And it's almost having a future focus right now. It's a really cool way of thinking about it.
By the way, 40 years ago when we signed our deal with Atlantic Records, it was an awful deal. I mean, one of the worst deals in the world. Like all bands sign horrible deals, and I always thought, just let me get my foot in the door, and let me make relationships, and it will change, and the deals will change, and they will get better. But you have to work on it very, very long term. I became friends with the future COO of Atlantic Records when he was running a studio. The recording studio, Atlantic Record Studio. We became friends. And you know what happened? That friendship became real, like real friends. When he became COO and the band broke up, I went to his office as friends and said, come on, you know as well as I do, we don't owe the record label $450,000. That this is just a bullshit number. You know as well as I do, this whole thing is crap, and you got to help me out here. And you know what? He nixed out the $450 and he gave me back 4 of my albums to license, which never would have happened if we were not personal friends. I guarantee you, it would not have happened. Or, for example, how's this one? You watch our video, we're not going to take it. Filmed by Marty Callner. Marty Callner's son, Dax, is 13 years old. He's one of the kids in the classroom, and I Want to Rock. Another one of those kids is named Chris Aaron. Chris Aaron, 13-year-old kid. We talked on the set. We became friends. And over the years, he'd text me, hey, JJ, it's Chris, blah, blah, blah. And he'd say, hey, man, guess what? Hey, guess what? I'm now working at Warner Music. Hey, man, guess what? I'm working in this division of Warner Music. Hey, man, time goes on. Ultimately, Chris Aaron runs the entire financial business of Warner Music. The whole thing. I find an inequity in one of my deals. I don't have to get you the complexities of it. I call Chris. I said, Chris, I could call a lawyer, and it will take a year and a half to do this, and it'll cost me a lot of money. But this is real. This is the situation. Can you handle it? And he called up someone and said, this is JJ. Straighten this crap out. And he handled it just like this. So this is that part of me that just says, you know what? Long-term relationships, solid relationships. It's a people business. And if you have those relationships, you can rely on those people. And, I've done some things which I can't get into I'm not going to waste the time now, but I have found things and done things in the industry that I've been told by professionals nobody ever saw, nobody ever found. It's because I researched it, I found it, and I solved it. And people were stunned because I would ask 20 business managers, did you know that there's this thing going on? They would go, no, I had no idea. Nobody had an idea, but I did. So again, that is a byproduct of my personality and long-term vision.
Yeah. Well, as good of a guitar player as you are, JJ, you're an even better storyteller. And the book is fantastic, man. Twisted Business is easy to read. Stevie did a great job of making sure that you left all the JJ that we need in here and put it in a great format. The Twisted format is fantastic. We could go over all of that, but I'm going to give you each one shot here. What's one thing that we should take away from the book that maybe isn't as obvious as any of the chapters? So, Steve, I'm going to start with you, and then JJ, I'm going to let you close up.
I think the biggest takeaway is that if you look at the success of an industry other than your own, for example, rock and roll, and analyze what is it that made it successful, you can apply it to your business, whatever it is. So this book will help you do that from the business of rock and roll to yours.
Awesome. All right, JJ, what's your one takeaway that you want people to get?
In the back of the book, we list all the shows that we played, going back to the beginning for me. And I say that I've done about 9,000 performances. I'd like to say that if you do something 9,000 times and you suck at it, you're really in the wrong business. But the truth is, that discipline comes into play here, and doing things over and over and over and over and over and over again, and learning from them. The whole nonsense about insanity is doing the same thing over, expecting a different result, is nonsense, because you do get a different result. Repetition makes you better at what you do, and that's why the greatest of everything done it thousands of times, whether you're a gold medal figure skater or the first chair at a violin at Carnegie Hall, or anything that you do. Repetition makes you better, because incrementally you don't even understand how your brain gets wired, and that's why Twisted Sister became a bulletproof live band on top of everything else, on top of the 20 million records sold and everything else. It was the discipline, and I had a band with guys who shared that same vision, that same discipline, and that same search for excellence. That's my
Awesome. So, folks, if you're looking for a book that's funny, it's insightful, and it's got stuff you can actually use, go pick up a copy of Twisted Business wherever you get great bizwars.
Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon's great. Yeah, Amazon's great too.
Else. Yeah. Amazon.
Yeah. So very cool. Steve, JJ, I appreciate you both. Thanks for spending some time with us. Thanks for sharing some Twisted Business with us. I appreciate
Thank you. It's a great pleasure.
Much. Yeah,
good to see you guys.
Thanks for Liz.